What it really takes is a family, and we as conservatives have to fight for the family.
A party that desires to lead this country must have an agenda that the American people believe helps them.
What is it that we can do to keep government from growing so large we can win this battle?
We have the privilege this morning of hearing from Congressman Jim Banks, one of the most entrepreneurial members of Congress when it comes to crafting new policies for the right. His speech is entitled American Renewal and the Decline of the Left. Congressman Jim Banks is a native Hoosier, born and raised in Columbia City. He earned an undergraduate degree from Indiana University and an MBA from Grace College. While serving in the Indiana Senate from 2010 to 2016, he chaired the Senate Veteran Affairs and Military Committee, where he led the charge on many significant pro-growth, pro-family, and pro-veteran reforms. Congressman Banks currently serves in the U.S. Navy Reserve as a Supply Corps officer. In 2014 and 15, he took a leave of absence from the Indiana State Senate to deploy to Afghanistan during Operations Enduring Freedom and Freedom Sentinel. Banks was elected in 2016 to represent Indiana's 3rd District and currently serves as chairman of the Republican Study Committee for the 117th Congress. He serves as a member of the House Committee on Armed Services, the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, and the House Committee on Education and Labor. Additionally, he serves as a ranking member of the House Armed Services Subcommittee, Innovation Technologies and Information Systems, co-chairs the House Armed Services Committee's Future Defense Task Force, and sits on the Naval Academy's Board of Visitors. Congressman Banks, along with his wife Amanda, are the parents to 3 daughters, Lillian, Elizabeth, and Joanne. They are honored to call Northeast Indiana their home. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Jim Banks.
Good morning. Great to be with you today. I'm sorry about yesterday. I was supposed to be here yesterday, but we had late votes on the floor. And I always tell people at home I get paid to do one thing, and that's to push a button that either says yes or no. So I had to stick around. I missed my speech in front of all of you yesterday, but I understand you got a better deal yesterday because I wasn't here. You were able to hear from former Attorney General and Senator Jeff Sessions. Were any of you here to hear him? How did he do? Thumbs up, good. So you got a better deal. But thanks for having me back this morning. Johnny, thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for all that you do to pull together such an important group of emerging leaders for our country. I was floored when I saw the speakers list that you had for this conference. Senator Rand Paul, who you will hear from later today. You heard from former Ambassador Lighthizer, Kevin Roberts, my good friend, the new president of the Heritage Foundation, former Senator Rick Santorum, Nate Hochman, to name a few. I wouldn't want to follow any of them, so I'm really glad to be here first thing this morning so that I don't have to follow any of these great speakers throughout the day. But thank you for giving me an opportunity. I'm humbled to share the same stage as many of these speakers that you've pulled together for this important conference. There's so much to talk about, so much that you're going to hear about yet today, and I wish I could stick around to hear from those speakers as well. Many of you in the audience are college students, and most students are probably here this summer as summer interns on Capitol Hill or in some way, shape, or form for our government or in a political capacity. Likely because after you graduate, you plan to, or maybe hope to come to Washington and find a full-time job in Washington, D.C. So pat yourself on the back. You are on the right track. The alternative, finding a decent job in any city or town outside of Washington next year or the year after, is going to be a lot much harder, if you think about it. D.C. doesn't just have many of the richest zip codes in the country, it's also famously recession-proof. Property values here were higher in 2009 than they were in 2007. No one has figured out yet how to outsource government jobs yet. So congratulations for being on this track that many of you are on to find work in the federal government. But our goal, conservatism's goal, and the goal of this conference is to make Fort Wayne, Indiana's economy as resilient as Washington's economy, to weld their fortunes together. I've already expressed as cheerily as I could my feelings about the Biden economy many times throughout the week on Capitol Hill. I could talk all day about inflation, the official recession that was met this week, the energy crisis, labor force participation, etc. But I spent a lot of my time talking about those things in my day job, so since it's the weekend, I'm going to skip the doom and gloom mostly. And instead, I want to point out that in the long term, there are many silver linings. There are three big reasons, I believe, for hope. And the first is that the Republican Party, the party that I'm a member of, is improving. Our electoral prospects have improved. We're going to get a lot bigger after the midterm elections this coming November in 2022. And our electorate has improved. Our voters are getting better at voting in the Republican Party. Last year, I handed Kevin McCarthy, our Republican leader, a memo arguing that we need to cement the Republican Party as the party of the working class. I argued that President Trump gave us a huge political gift as Republicans. In 2012, Wall Street supported Mitt Romney over Obama by a 3-to-1 margin. Think about that. By 2020, the dynamic had flipped. Wall Street donated 4 times more to Joe Biden for president than they supported Donald Trump. Big business, that means, supports largely the Democrat Party. And suddenly, working class voters who were on their side are now on our side. I recognized that early on because my dad is the typical Trump voter. He's the case study for what I'm talking about. He worked at a factory in Fort Wayne, Indiana all of his life. He made axles. I remember when I was young, we had a Ross Perot bumper sticker on the pickup truck, and at the time I was a little embarrassed about it. My dad, who was a strong union man, voted Democrat most of his life, the son of a coal miner from Kentucky who moved, my grandma and grandpa were true blue hillbillies, moved to just outside of Fort Wayne, Indiana with their 10 boys and girls. And my dad grew up a Democrat, considered himself a Democrat all of his life. In our house, NAFTA was a 4-letter word. He didn't like the Bushes and he didn't like the Republican Party until Donald Trump came down the escalator. And just like he was for Perot, he was for Donald Trump from that moment on. He now tells me every day that he's embarrassed that he ever voted for a Democrat. But my dad is your quintessential working class, blue collar voter that Donald Trump brought to the Republican side, who wasn't cemented with us before. On election night in 2016, when I won my tough race to become a United States congressman, my younger brother won a local county office as well. My dad was a lot more excited that Donald Trump won than both of his sons winning political offices. So my dad is who I'm talking about. Today, I can say, a year and a half after I wrote this important memo to Kevin McCarthy, the leader, about cementing the Republican Party as the party of the working class, I can say definitively that my memo was right. More working class voters are ditching the Democrat Party, and President Trump's supporters have stayed with the GOP. Hispanics have shifted to Republicans by 44 points in just 2 years. And working Hispanics are far more likely to support Republicans than college-educated Hispanics. So think about that for a moment as well. We are a party that cuts across racial lines and draws the support from all working-class Americans. It turns out that working-class Hispanics also don't like open borders, inflation, and gender ideology. They are not like tacos. They are like other working Americans. There's a saying that I heard when I was a college student that stuck with me. Science progresses one funeral at a time. Scientists are people, and by nature, people resist new paradigms and new worldviews. Politicians are also people, and politics progresses one election at a time. So when people ask me why the House is more aligned with the Trump movement than the Senate, I have a simple answer. They serve 6-year terms and we serve 2. I've been in the House since 2016, and I'm now more senior than most of my House colleagues. Most of us have had our formative political experience with Donald Trump in the White House. Where the House is now, the Senate will be after November. The Senate's silver lining is a very promising candidate, or a lot of promising candidates, like J.D. Vance, who headlined this conference last year. I'm very proud, by the way, to be the first Republican elected official in America who endorsed J.D. Vance for United States Senate over a year ago. The second reason for optimism as the Republican Party is improving is that the conservative movement is improving too. We need conservative representatives, but they aren't all that we need. The swamp has a sort of gravitational pull. Permanent Washington, the people who don't serve 2 or 4 or 6-year terms, are always the center of gravity in Washington, D.C. Trumpism or populism, whatever you want to call it, has always been an uphill battle against their inertia. But within conservatism, that inertia has shifted. The Republican Study Committee, my group, the largest caucus of Republican legislators in Washington, D.C., it formed in partnership, by the way, with the Heritage Foundation almost 50 years ago, is an active group that I'm proud to lead during this term. And the Republican Study Committee, under my leadership, and the Heritage Foundation, now under the leadership of Kevin Roberts, have both changed dramatically since Donald Trump became our president. We are still pro-life, we're still pro-family, we're still for pro-limited government, but we also are aggressively pro-border, anti-big tech, and anti-corporate wokeness. It's obvious to me that the energy among conservatives is with those ideas. It's at new groups like the Claremont Institute. It's with young writers like Nate Hochman. The swamp still exists, it's just more separated from the conservative movement than it ever was before. The third reason for optimism is that the left is in decline, or really in a free fall, if you're paying attention. Partially because of the disastrous Joe Biden presidency, but really low-energy Joe is the face of leftism. He's an icon. The left is simultaneously radical and stagnant. They support abortion on demand until birth, paid for, by the way, by Apple. Their leadership is crusty, their ideas are stale. They used to call Democrats the evil party and Republicans the stupid party. I would say that the Democrats are now the stupid and evil party. They are incapable of responsible governance, and that is making them unelectable, as you're going to see in this upcoming November midterm election. We just entered the first recession in history that's been caused by government spending. Voters care about inflation, but Democrats are responding with a $300 billion in tax hikes and $370 billion more in climate spending. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 that Democrats are telling us last night that we're going to come back in a few weeks during the August recess to vote for is just Build Back Better under a different name. The economic problems Americans face today are different than when Joe Biden took office, and they're a result of the Biden presidency and the policies of the Democrat Party. But the Democrats continue to push the same policies that got us to where we are today. Tax rebates for electric vehicles, which overwhelmingly, by the way, benefit the wealthy, billions of dollars for wind and solar industries, a, quote, 40% reduction in emissions by 2030. What does that all mean? Really, it means it's nothing. It's an empty promise. This isn't the New Deal, it's the same deal. The federal government will spend more taxpayer dollars, and they'll spend it on the same old failed policies that got us to where we are to begin with. If in the long term the left becomes irrelevant, Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and they are all the same, the right type of Republicans that we were just talking about. What happens then? What should we do? How can we make America's economy as resilient as Washington's economy? Our most immediate priority should be an old priority when we take control, and that is to cut spending. Reckless spending is the root of inflation, and we must get inflation under control first. Inflation isn't just a hidden tax on all Americans. Inflation is a hidden tax that hits the working class Americans the hardest. Americans are spending an extra $6,800 this year because of inflation. And that's a lot if you think about Americans who are making $50,000 a year. It is a far lighter burden if you make $1 million a year, which is now the constituency of the Democrat Party. Wages haven't kept pace with inflation, but housing prices and the stock market have. So if you make enough to invest or buy assets, then inflation hurts less. The fight against inflation starts next year in 2023 when we hit our debt limit once again. Republicans need to make sure that when we inevitably raise the debt limit, we also pass long-term spending controls. The second thing that we need to do when we take control is to tackle China. I know this has been a topic by a lot of other speakers who spoke to you today, and will continue to be an important topic later today as well. Americans view China most of all as an economic threat, and they're right. China is primarily a threat to America's working class. That's not to understate the military threat of China. And thanks to China's civil and military fusion, the two are closely related. China is the biggest long-term threat to our security. China could launch a physical attack on the United States, but China is attacking our economy right now and has been for years. China is a serious national security threat because we haven't treated the economic threat as seriously as we should for several years under several administrations, both Republican and Democrat. We need to limit investments in the Chinese Communist Party's controlled companies and firms, which means most Chinese companies. And we need to stop relying on China for essential goods. We need to reshore our manufacturing and build a made-in-America economy once again. Some in the audience and some of today's speakers supported the CHIPS package that passed this week in Congress, including a handful of my Republican colleagues. So I want to explain for a minute why I voted against it. First of all, it was too expensive. Congress shouldn't spend $250 billion when inflation is 9.1%. Most importantly, the package doesn't change our economic relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. It doesn't do enough to prevent chip manufacturers from building their businesses in China. So strong guardrails in the bill were a necessity, but they weren't added. U.S. companies lobbied to water down those safeguards because they want to expand their businesses in China, and we're giving them United States taxpayer dollars to do it. We know that they're going to try to do that. The bill also turns a blind eye to China's economic espionage. It makes Chinese companies eligible for research funding, paid for by all of you. And it spends billions on the same agencies like the National Science Foundation that we know are being pillaged by the Chinese Communist Party's spies. And finally, it spends $6 billion on green energy. So it was an easy no vote for me in spite of some of the rhetoric that this was somehow a tough on China bill. That brings me to the final priority that I want to emphasize before we turn it over to you for questions. Republicans should focus on lowering prices and creating high-paying, stable jobs that require hard work but don't require a college degree. We used to have a lot of jobs like that, jobs like my dad's job. But most of those jobs were outsourced to China and other foreign countries. But some of those jobs are still here. The United States is the largest oil producer in the world. We drill nearly as much as Russia and Saudi Arabia combined. 1 out of every 10 new jobs in the United States is in the energy sector. Energy is the last industry in America that gives millions of blue-collar workers stable, high-paying employment. And Democrats are working overtime to destroy the entire American energy sector. If we retain those workers and teach them to code, they'll end up like auto manufacturers in Detroit and coal miners in West Virginia. Who will believe our promise to bring back American jobs if we don't protect the ones that already exist here? The first thing that we must do when we take back the majority is to completely reject the premise of the Green New Deal. The world economy runs on oil and gas. Our goal is to make the world economy run on American oil and gas, period. We can't play along with the left's climate rhetoric. Americans saw firsthand that the, quote, scientific consensus is corruptible and partisan. According to the science, there is an invisible menace that, if unaddressed, will wipe out humanity. How do we address that? By subsidizing Democrat donors, bankrupting their enemies, and empowering federal agencies to regulate every aspect of private business in America's personal lives, according to the Democrats. But even that's not enough. Millions will still die unless we create a global enforcement body. Does that sound familiar if you're listening to these radical Democrats? Republicans need to undo the Biden administration's permitting restrictions. We need to build new pipelines. We need to make America energy independent again like it was just 2 years ago. Most of all, Republicans must take on the ESG fight and take it seriously. Peter Thiel recently defined ESG supporters as, quote, the finance gentocracy that runs the country through the silly virtue signaling hate factory term. I'd like to emphasize the least colorful part of that statement, where Peter says ESG supporters, quote, run the country. ESG really is an existential threat because it distorts and corrupts the economy. The largest asset managers in America are making financial decisions based on non-financial factors, like a company's, quote, carbon footprint. They are diverting capital away from energy, physical infrastructure, agriculture, and manufacturing, all the industries that require fossil fuels and American workers. And they are redirecting the money towards technology and other firms that burn less gas and create fewer jobs. ESG is harming the most economically productive companies that undergird our economy while creating a bubble in the service sector. ESG is the opposite of a free market. ESG is a market failure, and Republicans need to make it illegal. Politicians like to talk about how the next election is the most important election in their lifetime. But I'm here to tell you that the upcoming midterm election is not the most important election in history. It's not even close. You should still vote, and Republicans are going to take back the House and probably the Senate. I'm doing everything I can to make sure that happens. But either way, everyone is going to suffer through another 2 years of Joe Biden or a Democrat continuing at the helm in the White House. But the 2024 election will truly matter. If by 2024 Republicans have failed to convince Americans that we are the superior alternative, if we fail to beat the Biden presidency, then I don't see any silver linings. I don't expect that to happen, and I'm not going to assume that it won't. We can't rely on the other side to win. We can't just let the Democrats be the Democrats and assume that that's going to solve all of our problems, and that's enough for Republicans to win. Republicans need to articulate a clear vision for the future, and we need to explain how our agenda is different from what we have now and from what we used to have. Democrats are not going to convince working America. Their lives are now harder and more expensive than it ever was before. And Democrats don't want their support anyways. They've completely divorced themselves from working class America. But that doesn't mean Republicans can't lose working class voters, even though they're with us today. To win in 2024, we need working class voters to enthusiastically buy into what we're trying to do. That's my goal in Congress. It will be my goal for the next 2 years. If we screw it up, those voters leave us and we lose in 2024. If we do the right thing, do what we say we're going to do, fight back, and take a page from the playbook that we just discussed, I believe we'll win in 2024, and conservatives will be in the majority for a long time to come. So thank you for having me here today. I'm happy to take any questions if we have any time left.
Well, thank you, Congressman Banks, for being with us. We're going to take a few questions from the app, and then if you'd like, you can also. We don't have much time, but we will get to as many questions as we can. Our first question from the app is, given how out of touch woke capital is with working class Americans, how exactly should Republicans make ESG illegal?
Yeah, I spoke about this briefly. We have to pass legislation when we get the majority back that would make it illegal for these corporations to, who are investing at the corporate board level, their company profits, in woke policies that diminish the value of their company to begin with. I mean, take Disney as an example, right? So those shareholders who invest money in Disney should have an avenue to get their investment back that these woke corporate board members squandered on their behalf. So these are easy solutions, and I'm hearing more, by the way, I'm hearing more energy on Capitol Hill among my conservative colleagues about taking on this fight than ever before. And it gets to the heart of what I'm talking about. 5 years ago, the pre-Trump Republican Party would never take on corporate America in that manner, right? But because Democrats are now completely entangled in Wall Street interests, and Republicans have been able to divorce ourselves for the time being thanks to Donald Trump, we have an opportunity to do things that Republicans didn't have the backbone to do before.
Awesome, and we've got one more from the app. Someone said, the single greatest factor holding back our productive young people and their family formation is massive housing costs due to undersupply in our most economically productive areas. So what role does zoning deregulation have in the upcoming Republican agenda?
Zoning regulations play a big role in it. Obviously, inflation, energy cost, the left's entire agenda has driven up the housing market to unaffordable rates for most working Americans. So it's all a part of a recipe that we have to address. I hope Republicans will be laser focused when we get the majority back on that subject. You know, we will have our agenda when we roll it out. By the way, Leader McCarthy this week rolled out his commitment to America, which harkens back to the contract with America. Newt Gingrich has been very involved in helping us draft our agenda. But when we take the gavels and we take the majority in the House, we'll roll out our H.R. 1, our H.R. 2, our H.R. 3, and I hope those bills will reflect issues like these. At least I'm pushing for them to.
Well, hello, Congressman. Thank you so much for speaking. My question is on immigration. Typically, when Republicans talk about immigration, they immediately move into talking about border security, which is very important. I'm glad to see that so many Republicans care about the border. However, there still is very little discussion on actual immigration, like worker visas and what rates people come in and whether we have quotas from different countries. Obviously, you can't speak on behalf of every single Republican, but certainly as RSC chairman, could you speak to what is the consensus as far as immigration not in relation to border security?
Yeah, great question, great point. So the Republican Study Committee is a caucus of 162 Republicans out of nearly 213 or 214 in the House. So it's a sizable faction of Republicans, and this is an area where I think we're different than where we were before, right? We are focused on border security, but we're also focused on immigration policies that put American workers first. And that's what I'm talking about. It's a new day in the Republican Party, a new day in the conservative movement, where we recognize the importance of the America First agenda that Donald Trump articulated so well for our party. And I think back at the missed opportunities during the Trump presidency on this front. There was the Tom Cotton legislation that he introduced. Jeff Sessions was important on this subject early on, and of course during his time in the Senate. But the party has shifted more toward that and away from the weaker immigration policies, and I think you'll see evidence of that in a Republican-controlled majority. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. God bless you. Have a great day.